Hi everyone! Welcome back to another lesson as we wrap up our Figma Basics course. You've conquered the interface, mastered the pen tool, and navigated the world of images. Next up, blending modes. This is a tool that opens up a whole new realm of creative possibilities when working with images. Just check out this eye-catching effect. Ready to dive in? Let's get started. In this lesson, we'll explore blending modes, a feature that lets you control how two overlapping layers interact and blend. Imagine Figma extracting pixels from each layer and performing mathematical calculations to generate a unique outcome in the overlapping areas. Figma provides a collection of 19 blending modes, categorized into groups: default, darker, lighter, contrast, comparative, and color. Each blending mode employs its unique pixel blending algorithm to produce a wide spectrum of visual effects. Let's jump into some examples. As you can see, here are 4 identical images, each covered by a blue rectangle. Click on one of those rectangles, and bam! The design panel pops up with that familiar layer settings menu you know and love. This menu has a cool little water droplet icon for a setting. That icon controls how layers blend. It's like a magic mixing tool for your images. Let's play around and try different blending modes on each rectangle to see what happens. Don't sweat the first 2 modes for now. We'll get to those later. Blending modes in the darker group are all about darkening the lower layer with different levels of contrast. Think of it like a dimmer switch for shadows. Darken keeps the darkest colors from both layers. Multiply. Only the darker colors from the overlay layer stick around, while lighter colors get more transparent. Plus darker hits those midtones even harder. Color burn uses the colors from the overlay layer to darken the base layer and crank up the contrast between them. These modes are perfect for working with shadows or dark base layers. They can help you create a more realistic shadow effect or add some depth and texture to your image. Let's play around with these modes in action. Imagine you have an image with a plain white background. By choosing the multiply blending mode for this image's layer, you can practically vanish that white background. Now you can place your object on a different background, opening up creative possibilities. The multiply mode can also be your texturizing buddy. Let's say you want to add some paper texture to a poster image. By choosing multiply for the paper layer, it's like you're texturizing the poster itself. Let's brighten things up. The lighter group has blending modes that can help you boost the light colors in your images. Lighten keeps the lightest colors from both layers. Screen. Only the white and lighter colors from the overlay layer stick, while blacks and darks get more transparent. Plus lighter has a bigger impact on those midtones than lighten. Color dodge uses the colors from the overlay layer to lighten the base layer, bringing them closer together and reducing the contrast. With these effects, you can add some light to your images. For instance, we can make a turned-off lantern glow. We'll use the magic of blending modes to make it happen. We'll need a couple of circles in the color you want the light to be. First, I'll place a big circle over the flashlight and blur it a bit. Around 300 is fine. Then, I'll adjust the opacity to 70%. Next, I'll position it where the center of the light source should be. After applying similar blur and opacity settings to the second circle, I'll head to the layer palette for the final touch. Here comes the fun part, choosing the plus lighter blending mode, and Illumos. By tweaking the opacity settings, you can control how strong the light gets. The outcome of using blending modes in the contrast section depends a lot on what's actually in your layers. Overlay acts like multiply if the base layer is darker, or screen if it's lighter. Soft light is kind of similar to overlay, but it applies a darkening or lightening effect based on brightness values in a more subtle way, without harsh contrast. Hard light combines multiply and screen. It uses the brightness values of the top layer for calculations, while overlay uses the base layer. These contrast blending modes are fantastic for adding depth and some dynamics to your images. These blending modes can also be your go-to tools for photo editing. Let's say you have a picture of some flowers. Using the Command+D shortcut, you can create a duplicate layer. Then, select the top copy and apply the overlay blending mode to achieve an eye-catching visual effect. Blending modes in the comparative group are all about flipping white or light colors. Difference: subtract the overlay color from the base color, or vice versa, depending on which is brighter. When two pixels are the same, the result is black. Exclusion acts kind of like difference, but with a softer touch. It doesn't mess with the midtones as much, so the contrast isn't as dramatic. These effects aren't used all the time, but they can be handy in specific situations. For instance, imagine you have an X-ray image. By choosing the difference blending mode, you can create a cool, high-contrast effect that makes the image pop. The blending modes in the color group work with color hue, saturation, and brightness. These parameters are the building blocks of a color model called HSB. You can learn more about it in the module materials. But for now, let's focus on how these modes work. Hue uses the hue of the overlay layer, but keeps the saturation and brightness of the base layer intact. Saturation uses the saturation levels of the overlay layer, but preserves the hue and brightness of the base layer. Color uses both the hue and saturation of the overlay layer, while keeping the brightness of the base layer. Luminosity uses brightness, while preserving the hue and saturation of the base layer. It's like the opposite of the color mode. The modes in this group are super handy for recoloring things. For example, let's say you have an image with an orange ball, but you want it to be purple. By using a circle of the same size with the hue blending mode, we can recolor that specific object while keeping its texture. By changing the hue of the overlay layer, you can change the color of the toy in the final image. Color blending modes can also be used to desaturate specific areas of an image. Let's say you want to emphasize the piercing blue eyes of a cat in a photo. You can create two gray rectangles and place them over the areas you want to desaturate. Then, apply the saturation blending mode to these rectangles, and voila! The areas under the rectangles will turn black and white, making the cat's eyes stand out even more. In the examples I've shown so far, I've used separate rectangles to demonstrate the blending effects for clarity. However, as I mentioned in one of the previous lessons, a single layer can hold multiple fills. For instance, let's add another fill layer to this image of a flamingo. We can do this by clicking on the plus icon in the fill setting. Let's set the opacity of this layer to 90% and the type to a linear gradient from pink to blue. Within the settings of this fill layer, we can also customize the blending mode specifically for this layer. For example, let's choose color. Now, the image has taken on the hues of the colors we selected for the gradient. Let's take a closer look at the difference between the darker and lighter groups of blending modes. In this example, we have 3 vector waves. 2 of them have a gradient fill from saturated to transparent black, while the third has a gradient fill from saturated to transparent white. Let's select all the waves together. Looking at the blending mode settings, we can see that when using the darker group modes, the result only reflects the interaction of the dark layers with the background. When choosing modes from the lighter group, the result only shows the interaction of the light layer with the background. Let's get back to the default blending modes and understand their key differences. Pass-through is the default layer setting in Figma. With this mode, overlay layers will partially reveal the base layer, allowing some of it to shine through. Normal makes the base layer fully opaque, preventing overlay layers from blending with it. To grasp this difference, consider 2 identical frames each containing 2 intersecting circles with the multiply blending mode. Take a look at the blending mode settings. The default pass-through is applied to both. This means the overlay layers are currently visible through the base layer and interact with the background gradient behind it. Now, if I change the blending mode for one of the frames to normal, we'll observe that the base layer becomes opaque, blocking the overlay layers from blending with it. By exploring blending modes, you can create a wide range of visually appealing effects for your projects. Don't be afraid to experiment and discover the endless possibilities that these modes offer. And with that, we conclude our lesson on blending modes, and along with it, the Figma Basics course. Congrats! The next exciting step in your Figma journey is the Typography in Figma course. It will equip you with the skills to handle text in your designs, including fonts, styles, and more. I'm thrilled to have you join me on this next adventure in the world of Figma. Wishing you continued success in your learning and design endeavors.